This is episode 48. And I hope everyone is doing great. Today it is, I've had a really good couple of days at home catching up on a whole heap of things. I'm going to talk about one of those a little bit later on. Ethan is here. He's just running around and he's been a bit like, we're both running late this morning, had other things on the boil. So I hope everyone is doing fantastically well today and have all their projects together and organised. You've got your cup of tea sorted. I've actually made sure I've got some water with me this time so I don't get my coughs like I did the other day. But I'm going to jump straight in because there we go. Here he comes. Boom! Hello.
Good morning.
How are you?
I am good. I got up stupidly early, went for a 40K bike ride.
As one does.
And then had a quick meeting and came to work.
There we go. Excellent stuff. We've got so much to talk about because it's been a whole month since we caught up, and I was down there. I don't know where that's gone. It sort of kind of feels like yesterday, really. So we've been doing, and the neat thing is Ethan has brought some projects along, which we're going to jump into in a minute. But first, I'll catch you up on Rebel progress, and then I know you've got a Rebel sample there as well. And actually, this has been going really, really well. I said on Monday, Ethan, that a number of people were racing ahead and actually got their Rebel projects finished early, and it was because they wanted to get them in for Outlaw October.
That's awesome.
It is awesome. And they used the Bandit as well, which was great, the Sock Bandit, which is the same base yarn as I'm using. I think it's such a great yarn for this project.
So good.
And especially those jelly colours. But there's been a mixture of jelly colours and sprinkles. I've got a little buzzing, flying friend in here that's going to. In fact, I'm going to open the door with any luck.
Those ladies are always hard at work, making honey, pollinating things. We love them.
Yeah, no, this is not that kind of buzzing friend.
Oh, no.
No, I know.
As you know, I don't really enjoy anything with more than 4 legs.
Exactly. So I have pocket holes.
Look at that.
I know. Look at it. It's coming along. So for everyone who is working along on this, I have added an extra 5 centimeters through the length of mine because I just wanted a little bit longer than the cropped sort of length. So I have added an extra 5 centimeters under here. And there we go.
I love it.
Yeah, and it's going well. So I am doing the pockets. A lot of people chose to omit them.
Yes.
I actually quite like the idea of a pocket to nothing. And to be honest with you, it's just sort of the right size for you could actually put a credit card in. And I'm actually even thinking on one of them, I may even do like a little invisible closure on the inside or something like that.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I think because it's perfectly
it's great. You can fit a hanky in there. You know, if you're like me and you're always taking your jewelry on and off because you're doing things, those little pockets are actually useful.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm, so I sort of, where am I now? I've done about, a centimetre and a half, nearly 2 centimetres of the ribbing. So I've got another 5 or so centimetres to go on that. But awesome. That's nice. That'll keep me out of mischief across the weekend. And then I'll start hitting pocket liners and sleeves. So it's going really well, actually. Like I'm really enjoying.
Good.
It's
a soothing project, right? Like it's big, long rows. There's no crazy technique to it, but you're making something wearable.
But there are some really nice little techniques with the short rows and the shaping and the shoulders. And I'm finding that, you know, if you're somebody, I mentioned it on Monday, that if you're a bit of a beginner and you're looking at this and you're like, oh, actually, this is quite doable. You know, there's some nice little technique elements there that will challenge you a little bit. And I know a few people have been challenged with like the provisional cast on right from the get-go and those German short rows right at the very beginning. But you know what? There is also some really beautiful plain sailing parts as well. Yeah. And it's a good project to actually give you, there's my little friend, to give you a couple of extra bits and pieces for your toolbox whilst working on a project. So, you know, if you're actually looking at this thinking, I can't do it, actually you can. And do challenge yourself.
And learning a German short row will change your knitting life. Because
Yeah, and
undoubtedly, to me, everyone out there, you can have your personal opinions. The German short row is the most useful.
Yeah.
It works beautifully flat. It's one of the only ones where you don't have to do some crazy weird trick when you're using it in the round. Because wrap and turns are great when you're knitting flat.
Yes.
But once you get into knitting something in the round, picking up that purl side wrap from the knit side and making it invisible, I remember, I believe that it is Stephanie Erpel, Yarn Harlot, who has a whole video about how to do that.
Yeah, and there's mine through there. To be fair, the yarn helps hide it. But as much as German short rows annoy me, what I tend to do, so for those who haven't done German short rows, essentially you're pulling this yarn across the needle and it's literally
exposing
like,
the legs.
Yeah. Or
so it
depending on
it
which
looks
way
like
you're
you
feeling.
have tipped a lovely dancer onto her rear end.
Yeah. And I have to admit, what I did tend to do, that at the days that I was doing the short rows, somebody had actually annoyed me that day. So I just, every time I did one of those German short rows, I was doing this, and it made me feel better. See, it's always good to turn a negative into a positive.
Yeah, knitting definitely helps with life.
I mean, it does.
Elizabeth Zimmerman identified that a long time ago.
Yes, exactly. And so, yes, I've done them, but I'm lazy. I'm one of these people that I have my favorite techniques, and that's what I like to do, and I don't like to mix it up. So I had to just get over my big bad self, because I knew that the German short row was the way to go on this. And I'm
the worst for that, because I see a new technique and I swan dive into it. Just full force, leap off the edge, hope for the best.
Yeah, and I wanted to with this, because I knew that there were a couple of elements in there that would challenge some knitters, that I thought, no, I need to actually go in, and instead of doing my classic Marie make things up as I go along and modify it, I needed to actually knit it as it was written in pattern for people. So then that way they, I could go along with them at the same time. So
yeah, I tend to find a balance lately between those two things, because I want to make things that are going to make me happy. Yeah. But I also want to make things the way the pattern is written, so that people can see the outcomes that they can get from following a pattern. And I think that it's really good that both of us alternate kind of between doing those two things.
Yeah.
I hope everybody at home feels freed to take risks when Marie and I take risks, because the best part about knitting, and we were talking about this a little bit last night at our knitting group, for me on a lot of these projects, is worst case scenario, you just rip back and start over.
Exactly.
It's not like sewing, where I personally have gone on a sewing journey and cut something on the wrong bias, blah, 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 blah. And then, the whole project just doesn't work.
Yeah.
With knitting, it's made a mistake, rip it out, redo it, or not. Some of our knitting friends, some of our very talented knitting instructor friends that you and I both know, are big believers that you leave the modifications in when you make an error.
Yeah. I tend to look, unless it's completely irreversible and it's a mistake that changes, particularly if it's a lace work or a pattern work, you can't do anything around it. I will often tend to leave a mistake in, because 9 times out of 10 you'll never know it's there to begin with. Frogging's not the end of the world.
No. And the big thing about it, I've always noticed for me with frogging, is you just have to do it immediately.
Yeah.
If you see the mistake sitting there, don't hesitate. Don't give it 2 seconds. Immediately just rip.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I had that on the Goldwing, remember? And yes. I was just like,
oh. And I don't know if everyone at home knows this little trick, but if you keep some sellotape at hand and some cotton or silk waste yarn, to put lifelines in an easier method, what you can do is right at the join of your needle. Oh God. Please hold. Right at the join of your needle, sellotape a little piece of cotton yarn right there on the working side needle, so on your right hand needle, and with the yarn hanging from the ball, and then as you knit across the row, it puts the lifeline in for you. And then all you do is slide it past the end, undo the sellotape, boom, instant lifeline.
Stop it! I've not heard that one before.
So I came up with this a long time ago. because when I was first knitting, I knit a lot of lace.
Yeah.
Like a lot of lace. And there is no experience worse than trying to sew a lifeline into lace.
Yeah.
Because it's like, is this a stitch? Is this a yarn over? What has been happening here? So I thought about it. And I used to use those Xiaogu needles.
Yeah.
And for those of you at home who use them, you know they have a very excessive taper at the end, even on their smaller sizes, because of the way that their cable joins work, right? Into those thick red cables, which I like for knitting flat. I don't like so much for knitting in the round. But the nice part is it gives you a place where you can really easily tape something, and it doesn't get picked up as you're knitting across it because the stitches are just sliding by.
Yeah.
And then at the end, you just literally slide it over, undo the tape, and boom, it's in there. Trim it off the ball on the other end. There you go.
There you go.
Well, and you can do it on any needle type. And if you're someone who has some of the what are they? Some of the Knit Pro ones actually have a little hole.
I was just about to say a very fine crewel needle, you'll be able to get through that little hole.
You can just thread a piece through it and it does the same thing. Some of the Addy cables actually have a split built into them where you push them and they open and you put the yarn through. So these are some of the best ways for doing lifelines.
Actually, I've got an Addy here that I can show you that. Yeah. And that would, here we go. Yeah. So that's how that one works.
Yeah.
And you could literally put, like, if you had even a polyester thread, run the thread across the top, jam that sucker in like that, and the thread will just come out and you would just run it through.
I don't have any of my extra cables here, but the newest Addy cables actually right in this section have a split built into them. And you literally just pinch it and it opens up the split and you thread the yarn right through it.
Stop it.
Yeah. Lifelines have, I think, gone from something that we didn't talk about a lot as knitters.
Yeah.
Because I don't know about you, but I would say roughly 10 years ago when I joined my first knitting group that I didn't run, lifelines were something dirty that we just didn't talk about.
I think there's always been a certain skill snob factor with lifelines. I use them all the time.
Exactly. And I loved my initial knitting group, but it was kind of like joining the Knitting Justice League. Yeah. Like, you know, there was like the lace knitter, the sock knitter, the jersey knitter, the cable queen, right?
Yeah.
And I came in as someone who had great tension, had knit a lot, but hadn't done garments, hadn't really followed patterns at the time. And I was really lucky that I got to absorb so much information from all of these people really quickly. And they were really gracious, but there was also a big skill snob factor.
Yeah, absolutely. For those now, the other thing you can do as well, like, so if you wanted to do a retrospective lifeline, which I do all the time. So with my gold wing, for example, when I realized that, to catch people up, I knitted Gold Wing by Jennifer Steingass, and I decided to put a swing back, a suede short road back on the back of it, which I do on a number of sweater projects. I just find for someone my size, it's a more flattering edge for me. So I add that in there. And I did it and I counted, and I happened to get to the short row section quite late at night, finished it, felt really good, went to go and cast off and held it up and realized that I'd put the sway back into the front of the garment and not the back of the garment as I thought I'd done. And I was ropeable, and it was about 11 o'clock at night when I realized this. And so what I do, and I mean, I would never have thought to put a lifeline in for something like that, because that is just such a
we do it all the time.
Mistake. And so I ended up taking just a wool needle and then just sort of literally snaking through on that row, all those stitches all the way through, sort of like a little dolphin going through roundy, and put that lifeline through. And then, as Ethan said, don't leave these things too long. So because I put that lifeline in, I actually did it on quite a chunky yarn because I was tired, but got the lifeline in, ripped that sucker back, swearing and cursing and at myself at making such a rudimentary mistake. But then at least in the morning when I got up, all those stitches were sitting live on a piece of chunky yarn that all I had to do was re-put my cabled needle back through the next morning and start again.
Yeah. I will say when I do a retrospective lifeline, I tend to take 100 centimeter sock needle
Yep.
And just pick up the stitches onto the sock needle.
Yep.
And leave them on that while I rip back. But that's because I am neurotic. I don't know if you're aware, right? Now, my current project is not necessarily very fun to look at, but I'm going to give everybody a little flash of it. I'm in the midst of a row, so you'll have
I'm going to pop you up on so your screen is big so everyone can see it.
Now, what I am knitting with is really exciting, but what I'm knitting is not terrifically exciting looking. So I am making Agnes by Jared Flood. So right now I'm working on the hem of the back. So this is the hem. It's a beautiful project. It has garter stitch edges. The majority of it's in stockinette. It's knit up on a 4mm needle. So don't worry, this won't take very long. Like a lot of Jared's projects, it is deceptively simple. So you're knitting very simple pieces that then get seamed together because Jared loves a seam. He's not a seamless boy. If you ever get the pleasure of meeting him, even though he's actually fairly shy, he will be wearing a hand-knit, hand-drafted garment that you'll never see designed because he often designs things and then realizes they're too hard for people to make. The yarn, though, that I'm using is our Rebel base because I have the first samples of it in hand. So this is going to be a 3-color project. And my goal with this is just to get everybody a chance to try out a nice, simple seamed project that will take you from maybe not having a great confidence about seams, maybe not feeling like you're going to get a great fit on a finished garment, to something that works with lots of ease, is very comfy, and just has beautiful, simplistic techniques throughout that will give you a great polished garment. There are some short rows. I was a little inspired by your Rebel actually. And I looked for something that had similar elements. So really great color play was important to me, which is something that you can do so well on stockinette. To me, that's the best place to play with color. There are 2 color blocking options for this garment as well. So and 2 sleeve options. So if you like a slim sleeve, there's an option for that. There's a fitted sleeve option, and a classic sleeve option that's not as fitted. And like a lot of garments that I see people really enjoying, especially here in New Zealand, it has a drop shoulder. And it has a nice open crew neck, everyone at home. You can very easily raise the neck just by knitting more finishing rows in the neck piece, which I am going to do on mine because this is not a store sample, it's a personal sample. But it gives you all that generous space for those of you who have some yardage, as Deb would say, and also just gives a great simple fit with a lot of short rows up at the front and some really beautiful decreasing, which if you knit Brooklyn tweed patterns, you will know that Jared Flood has thought about the position of every single decrease on every single size. And the one thing I have to give them credit for, if you're looking to knit from their patterns, they test and sample knit every single size of every pattern that they release.
Wow. Yeah. And that's no small thing because there are subtle differences that happen with sizing. You know, it does make a difference. Now, I've got a question here from Christina.
Okay.
She is asking, can we please see close up of Ethan's knitting technique, preferably slowed down considerably? Well, I don't have slow-mo, but we'll see how Ethan goes.
So I do this thing where I tension the yarn continental, but on my right hand. So classic continental tensioning is over between the pinky, around the index finger once or twice. I prefer twice. I find it gives me more control. So what this does is it allows me, by squeezing my pinky open and closed, to control how fast or slow the yarn slides through my hand. So it works like a brake on a bicycle, if that makes any sense to you guys at home. I then maintain my yarn tension by holding it forward, and I'm going to knit slowly and backwards so that you can see it the way that I see it a little bit. Ooh, maybe not. So as I work through, what's happening is I'm inserting with my right hand needle. I wrap around without releasing the yarn or the needle. I pull down and through and off. So it's down and through and off. And I'm actually using the momentum of the needle going forward to then pull the stitch backwards, which is how you get the insane speed. And believe it or not, I know that didn't look slow. This is actually me knitting quite slow. So that's pretty much as slow as it gets. Let me Let me think. Oh, everyone, you're going to get nauseous for about 2 seconds, okay? All right. Here we go. The lighting isn't perfect, but there are my hands in the camera. And so this is what it looks like for me when I'm knitting. Woo! It's a little messy.
Bearing in mind that he's purling there, guys. So that's
yes,
why
I am purling across this row. And that's it. That's a close-up of my knitting style. We're back.
We're back. Well done.
I knit quite a bit flat, and I still do cables, but I used to do an immense amount of cabling. So the traditional continental style is slower for cables. And I taught myself how to knit continental quite a while ago, and then realized it wasn't really working. So I came back to throwing, and someone I used to work with named Deanna actually knit with this method. And I saw her doing it one day, but realized I could make it even faster because I have very large hands.
Yeah, I was just about to say, you could see the lever effect because you have got long hands and fingers, and that definitely works. I mean, like I've got very big hands as well, and I throw too. And whilst I don't quite leverage the same way you do, I mean, you and I have sat many times around,
and knit,
rabbling away.
Both very speedy.
Yeah, and I mean, and actually, Christina, a lot of it comes down to what you're comfortable with. I mean, I still know some knitters get very. I mean, I know that people like June Hemel, she'll say, "Oh, well, you need to learn all these multiple different techniques and throw the techniques out for different things." And I mean, for some people, that works great. For others, I mean, I've played around with continental because I do like the idea that if I'm doing sways of stockinette in the round, I can see the logic behind the continental method because it would be very quick. But I always end up reverting back to what I know because I just find that for me it's around the tensioning where I get good tension, and I know that I can get good tension in the method that I use all the time. So it's horses for courses. It's whatever works for you to get your finished result. Now, when I was down last month, you were working on the Bohemia Sport project. Was it Twig and Willow, and what was it called?
The Twigs by Junko Okamoto.
I knew there was twigs involved. I think when I texted Ethan this morning to tell him to bring these samples with him, I think I just called it the twig sweater. Bring the twig sweater.
It does have a lot of twigs in the color work. Yeah. So for everyone at home, this is a Junko Okamoto design. Now, she is a very, very petite and lovely Japanese woman. She designs beautiful all over color work and texture sweaters, often using sport weight yarn knit at a very dense gauge, which we are big fans of. So this is a sport weight yarn intended to be knit on a 2.75 millimeter needle. So this was my Outlaw October project. I got it done in about 21 days of knitting in total, including the blocking. So it looks a little something like this.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So it's really, really fun to make if you like color work. And this pose is really enjoyable to hold. If any of you are looking for the optimal way to show off a sweater, I highly recommend this exact position. The garment is intensely color work. So you're dealing with a lot of detail. I find charts like this very easy to follow personally. So I did not put any markers to break up the repeats. Some of the charts are up to 80 stitches wide. So if you are going to be working this, you may want to put in repeats if you find it hard to read your knitting and read a chart simultaneously, recognizing that those are two separate skills that you have to build. You don't just wake up one day reading a chart and reading your knitting or doing either. So if you're at home and you're thinking, I can't do this, you absolutely can. You have to take it one stitch at a time. Markers are your friend. And remember that it doesn't matter how long it takes you to make something. This is not a race. And if you are race knitting, why? I have serious questions for you.
Well, and the thing I loved with that project too, because I mean, you literally cast it on when I was there. Yes. And there were two things that stood out. One, Bohemia Sport on that tension is
it's
freaking
so good.
Fabulous. It is
amazing.
So good. And I mean,
it's
I know
amazing.
that there's always this trend to want to push gauge out to make things all drapey and wonderful. But I have to admit, because both the Japanese and the Scandinavians do have a
Dense
tendency
gauge.
to actually use a firmer, more structured gauge. Bohemia Sport in that gauge is something to behold. Honestly, people, it is a thing of beauty. The resulting fabric is divine.
Now, I was, not to say lucky, because I don't believe in luck. I had already knit 3 things at this exact gauge, so I didn't have to swatch it all, which was really, really nice. If you're looking for something to practice working this gauge at, the Orfeo hat and cowl set by Amy van der Laar is a great place to start. Same gauge, same yarn, same color work idea, same big motifs with trapping your floats and everything like that involved. Definitely worth it if you want to practice before you jump into something like this. It does not take nearly as long to knit at this gauge as what people think it will either. I think that's one of the myths I want to kind of dispel for people about a garment like this. It just doesn't, it feels like it's going to take forever because you're on a very small needle, and I appreciate that, and it's a lot of stitches. But as you get into the rhythm of color work, it actually goes much quicker than plain stockinette for the majority of knitters out there. And everyone thinks it's a mental trick that like, oh, I'm really excited to get to the next thing. But actually it's because you're paying more attention to your knitting. When we knit plain stockinette, the majority of knitters who have been knitting for a while, we don't really think about it or pay attention. But when you're doing something like this, you're probably watching what you're doing. And so each stitch gets thrown a little bit faster and a little more accurately. So you tend to end up with better tension and better overall shaping. Now, I did not make very many modifications to this, which is unusual for me. I knit it almost exactly to pattern, cast on the same number of stitches, knit the exact number of rows on the collar that it suggested, did all the short rows as recommended, knit the entire thing, including the sleeves, to pattern exactly, same number of rows, same decreases. The only adjustment I made is because I am 184 centimeters tall, and the designer is, I'm probably going to exaggerate, but maybe 152 centimeters, give or take. She's very petite.
Tiny.
So a lot of her garments are not particularly long, and you may see her in photos of some of her stuff in a very long garment. I guarantee you it's not nearly as long as you think it is. She's just wee. So I did improvise some color work here at the bottom. This little section that looks hopefully like it came with the rest of the pattern is actually just purely improvised. So I took an old Swiss cross pattern, elongated it, and reversed it every other section. And that's it. So keep in mind, the one thing I would say, if you're going to add length, don't repeat one of the motifs from the pattern. There are and I'm not exaggerating, tons of different stitch patterns out there that you can find that will fit in with this color work, because she uses so much variety throughout the piece. But don't repeat it, because nothing else in the garment repeats. If you look over the entire body of it, it's all unique color work.
Let's give you some.
There we go. So it's all unique color work throughout the entire piece. So you don't really want to repeat something.
And the other thing too, when she wrote the pattern as well, I remember that was one of the things that we were when we were together, is she'd written each chart in little sections. So you were just like, oh, I might, you were like, bing, finish that one, let's go to the next one.
So the Japanese normally do fully corresponding patterns. And by that, what Marie and I mean is, you're going to get each piece broken out into sections. It'll either come as a big fold out road map. For those of you who are still alive when maps existed, you don't need an explanation. But for those of you who have not experienced a paper map, many moons ago, and by many moons, I mean like 8 years, when you needed to go somewhere, you would go and purchase from a service station this esoteric item known as a map instead of using Google. And it would fold out, right? So the Japanese tend to do that. And what they do is they put a schematic of the pattern broken into delineated sections. So if this was written in a classic Japanese style, the pattern would have each section, the number of stitches that you're supposed to have at the beginning and end, with no instructions as to how you're to increase or where you're to increase. just as a fun fact, they assume that you are going to increase evenly across the rows that they are giving you to work. And so it would say section 1, which would be this little piece here, this first piece, would be stockinette, and it would have the stitch pattern, either a number corresponding to a stitch Bible, which is like a stitch dictionary, except there are 12 volumes of the Japanese stitch Bibles that exist. And they are organized according to type of stitch. So texture, I'm not going to remember the order properly, but texture, cables, lace, combination stitches, and then there are like 8 books of color work. So good luck. If you find them and read Japanese, please enjoy. Then you would get the next section delineated on the pattern with how many stitches to have at the beginning and end, which would be this little piece of color work. And it would say, use color work motif from book blah, 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 page blah, 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 over X number of stitches. And it would just assume that you would know how to do that. And so on and so forth for the rest of the entire pattern. You would not get any instructions as to which increases to use. You would not get any instructions as to how to do your ribbing or how to finish anything. And so what Junko has done is kind of taken that ethos and brought it to a place that's more accessible for the global knitting community. So each pattern repeat section and its corresponding increase section that happens in the stockinette are linked together so that they stack, and each one is written out with the chart directly underneath of it in the pattern. So you have instructions, chart, instructions, chart. And instead of it reading left to right across long rows like what we're used to, it is in vertical sections printed landscape, which is very common for modern Japanese patterns. So you're dealing with something that helps, I would say, be a bridge. If you haven't knit a Japanese pattern previously and you're considering doing one, Junko is a great place to start. There are tons of Japanese designers who do release patterns with English instructions. They tend to be a little loose. So if you are not a confident knitter, and this, by the way, is a big difference in the knitting communities that exist. I think that we forget that there are multiple knitting traditions because knitting is a very, very culturally specific often. So the Scandi knitters have their own dialect of knitting, if you will, their own gauge and tension ideas, their own entire basis and ethos of finishing and fit and all of those sorts of things. The same with the Japanese, the same with the Scottish, same with the English. The French have their own traditions. Let's not go into the Italians because that's a mess. Trust me.
And I mean, and that's the thing with the North American, and I think with a lot of Kiwis too. I mean, we tend to follow the British tradition down here. But when you actually get into the North American, because of the immigration into the country, it is this...
It's a mishmash.
Crazy mishmash of a whole bunch of different things. So,
I mean, it's... As someone who came up in the North American tradition as the mills were restarting in North America, as the major pattern design houses and the designers who have shaped the industry as we know it today, most of whom are North American, to be completely honest, I was really in a great position to pick up so much different stuff. And I happened to live in a university town. And if there's one thing a university town brings you in North America, it's people from all over the world. So, you know, we had Scandinavian knitters, we had Japanese knitters, we had all of these different people in our knitting groups. Interestingly, the 4th largest knitting event in North America is the Toronto's Knitters Frolic. It is a 3-day event, and it is actually hosted by the Japanese Embassy at the Japanese Cultural Center in Toronto. So you have examples of Japanese knitting, a lot of the Japanese stitch Bibles and other things, and Japanese knitters who are there and actively engaged in the process of it. So it was a really cool way. You know, you meet like Eri Shimizu is a great designer who does not publish anything in English. Just forewarned now, all of her stuff is in Japanese. 90% of it isn't on Ravelry. Her stuff is incredible and almost unknittable. Because there's an assumption in the Japanese community that you are going to follow a pattern in a certain way because everyone is taught a certain way how to knit. And that involves provisional cast-ons for every project. Almost none of them would ever do a cast-on into a ribbing unless the pattern is designed for export to a North American market. They're going to assume that you're going to cast on provisionally, knit the entire piece. If it's seamless, if it's not seamless, come back, undo that cast on, and knit your ribbing downwards to perfect the fit. And also because downward knit ribbing visually is more appealing in the Japanese tradition. And interestingly, it means that your ribbing direction on collars and your ribbing direction on sleeves and hems all lines up instead of being divergent. So it's about creating a cohesive, polished, finished garment. And everything is finished with a sewn bind off.
Yeah, with balance. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've got a great question here from Eleanor, and she's asking, would Little Bandit also, a Little Bandit be good also knit at this firm tension? And the answer to that is yes.
Yeah. Natural yarns want to be knit densely.
Yeah.
Natural yarns, the thing is, all natural yarns, especially if they're 100% wool, have the biggest flex in what you can do with them by far. I think we can all agree to that. However, they do their best work at a denser gauge because the fiber benefits from being close to itself. The tighter it is together, the less those stitches can move. The less those stitches can move, the less they distort over time, the less it will pill. And I want to say this clearly, pill over its lifetime. Your garment is going to pill. Everyone embrace this. It doesn't matter what natural fiber you knit this out of. Cotton pills.
Yeah.
Just as a side note. Actually, sometimes worse than wool. So it's the longevity of the garments that you create definitely increases as your tension gets denser.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and that's weird because I know the denser tensions are very popular in the Scandinavian tradition, and the Scandinavians, longevity is a really important thing for them. They will knit something once, and that they want that to last. It is made to last. Yeah. I have to admit, I love working with Little Bandit, particularly on those firmer tensions. You can use Little Bandit as a sport weight yarn, and we do have a tendency to do that with Southender Sport and Little Bandit, but actually there is a thing of beauty. I love Little Bandit and Southender Sport on a 3mm needle. It is a thing that brings joy to your life. I just absolutely love it.
And I will say as well, a lot of those bigger needle gauges, even if you're at a 10 ply or 12 ply gauge, like going up to a 5mm or a 6mm, it's because it's intended to be cabled. And cabling increases the tension of a fabric naturally. So you can knit a cable on a larger needle and end up with something that lasts just as long. But if you're knitting plain stockinette, you're going to get a different result. Yeah. And if you're looking for a way to make these conversions as to what you should do, Nora Gaughan's Knitted Cable Sourcebook has a great little piece of math in it called the Stockinette Stitch Equivalency System, SSES. Which is how you calculate what your gauge would be for a cable if you were to knit that same amount of stitches, that same amount of width in stockinette, and then therefore what needle you should be using. So if you were taking a panel out of a cabled garment and replacing it with stockinette, you may need to drop a needle size.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think we often don't necessarily discuss because people don't do it as much. Back... And I mean, it seems like ages ago, 10 years, because knitting has moved at warp speed for something that we do by hand. But 10 years ago, we were still working from the Alice Starmore books from the 80s. And Alice Starmore is an unequivocal genius when it comes to Aran sweaters. But there are some Alice Starmore things you don't want to look at necessarily in a modern knit garment. For myself personally. And so I used to just eliminate some things or replace them with a different cable that worked over the same number of stitches. It's not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's where all of that comes into play for me.
I'm glad you mentioned cables because I'm going to bring this up, and I think, and we're going to go into colour work as well, talking about the last show and tell you bought. But the bit of show and tell I've got, and I'm kind of hoping I can get this up today if we can get it from the mill. But we have a new Southlander colour.
Ooh, who is this?
So this is silver. And actually, I should have grabbed an oatmeal. I might get, oh no, she's busy. So this is, I'm just going to hold it up to the camera there. Hopefully it will pick up I'm going to pick it up. So it is a gradient. So our oatmeal is sort of more of a parchment. This has definitely got, it is more grey, and it is in the cooler tradition. So it is definitely a cooler shade than what our oatmeal was. Our oatmeal tends to be a wee bit warmer. It is a wee bit deeper. And it's just fantastic. And we've been wanting to get this into Southlander for a while, particularly with people wanting to work with colour work. And it complements all the other colours that we have in the Southlander range. And you're probably not aware, but we're having a spotlight on Southlander this month. So this will be launching at $10.95 a ball, normally $14.95 a ball.
Amazing.
So that's fabulous. But I bring this up because of the beautiful thing with Southlander and colour work, particularly if you've got this as a main colour, these come in big 200 gram balls, but you don't necessarily want to buy another 200 gram ball when a 50 grams will suffice with a piece of colour work, which is where Southander's very, very good friend Bandit comes into play, because they are both Bandit and Little Bandit are spun to exactly the same count as Southlander DK and Southlander Sport.
Look at us go.
Yeah, so this is really important, because it means that when you're coming to do colour work, it expands the number of colours that you have available to you to be able to create really incredible garments. And I've just plucked these three out because these three just make me happy. These three shades, which is it's Mischief. I know is one of them. Mischief, Frolic, and Rapscallion, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. There. But see those guys there.
Yeah.
Incredibly happy friends.
Absolutely.
Incredibly happy friends. So if you are planning some color work and you are worried about you're wanting to use something big and natural like this, but you're worried about getting color complements to use, don't forget the Bandit yarns to add into that to extend your.
Just in general, don't forget about Bandit
when it comes
to cabling. When it comes to, and same with Southlander, you're gonna be happy with a natural yarn. It might not be as plush as some of the other options out there, but we're going to tell you, A, it'll stand the test of time in a way other yarns won't. B, I'm going to come out of the closet as an anti-merino person. Look, the merino marketing board is incredible. Just amazing. I really want to meet them. My hat's off to them. And there are lots of great reasons to choose merino. Everyone at home, don't worry. I'm not coming to take it away from you in your houses yet. But I love a rustic yarn. I love the way that they wear in instead of wear out. That's kind of how I like to think about it. When you start off with a rustic yarn, it might not necessarily be soft and plush and squishy immediately in the way that you're thinking of. But if you give it a little bit of time and you keep wearing it, it is going to turn into something that will be with you, A, forever, and B, just be so great in all sorts of weather. Yeah. That's the other thing. These natural yarns, when they get even a little bit of moisture on the outside, it pearls up on the outside and you can just shake it off.
Yeah. They're fantastic. I just love them. So then, but speaking of color, because in these sorts of combinations, do tell. I mean, this test knit, I got to see this so long ago now, and I can't believe it. Seems like forever since you finished it, and I've been waiting to be able to show people because it is utterly, utterly beautiful. So show us this because it is incredible.
So I was really lucky. I have a very good friend, Hiroko Payne, who designed the Sode cardigan from Lina issue 6, which is a big, beautiful cabled masterpiece. I made one, and we became friends just chatting because there's actually not that many of them that exist. And hello, I'm the only person with a penis who's made one. So Hiroko and I got to chatting, and I do technical editing in the knitting industry. And so she was looking for a new technical editor to help out with some patterns. And so she had this really great idea, and she showed me this swatch. And I love color work. The more complicated, the better. And she offered me the chance to technically edit and test knit the Kitsune Omoi or Fox Thoughts cardigan, which you might have seen as the cover garment for the most recent issues of Pom Pom Quarterly that's coming out, modeled by the amazing Justin Kim, who is an opera singer and yarn dyer for La Bien-Aimée in Paris. And I happened to get one of the original color ideas. So this is actually based on the original swatch that Hiroko made.
Yeah.
And the colors were chosen partially to go with me, which, it's a pretty magical thing that happened. So she used extremely traditional ideas of color work and then applied them in a modern fashion. So in this, what you're seeing is some very Scandi style work at the top, transitioning into some more Russian sort of ideas of color work here. And then it makes a move through to the very, very traditional look of Fair Isle in the flowers, and then finishes with some Japanese flourishes. The color work is incredibly subtle because I knit this in the original yarn, which is La Bien-Aimée Helix, held double. So that is a lace weight yarn held double, which makes it roughly a sport weight, give or take a little bit. And what you are doing is you are actually marling for these color changes. So you are dropping one strand and changing to the next color in both the foreground and the background simultaneously. Yeah, it is a journey of knitting. For those of you who have done color work before over large swaths, you can see that there are a ton of stitches making up each individual little piece. There is so much detail in it. It is definitely a masterpiece work. Aimee Gillette and Stephen West guest edited the most recent issue of Pom Pom. And so they chose this as the cover, having seen us all making our samples. So it was a really cool thing because we got to test knit for Pom Pom and for Hero at the same time, which felt like a huge, huge gift. And it was just the chance to make something that you only really get to see once in a lifetime.
Yeah.
And I will say that the secret of this is definitely how good the sleeve is. That sleeve color work is banging and not necessarily easy to see, but totally beautiful. It's very, very fun and very, very technical. There are almost every technique under the sun in this particular pattern. I'm not going to lie to anyone at home. This is definitely for an experienced knitter. And I would recommend knitting it in a quiet room, maybe with an audiobook or a podcast or some music on. It comes in two versions. So this is the pullover. There is also a cardigan version, which is really beautiful, slightly cropped, has a really interesting way of building your steek and incorporating and reinforcing it and making facings. I have seen all of the versions that exist. Mm-hmm. You can see my project on my Ravelry page anytime. And I'm going to be honest, while this side is beautiful and incredible, and I absolutely love it, the real story, and where you can really see the color changes happening. For those of you who know me personally, I am a float king. If there's something that brings me great pride, it is the fact that I finished this garment so that I could wear it completely reversed. Which gives you a much better idea. You can really see the color changes occurring in this background section, especially here in the floral area.
Yeah.
But what's really cool about it is you lose none of the detail on the backside.
Yes.
Which is just amazing to me. Definitely a tour de force of design. Hiroko makes singular garments. They're not repeatable. You're not going to see anything else like them. Mm-hmm. They are entirely unique, and each one is its own little perfect moment. Mm-hmm. You could absolutely work this in Bohemia Sport. Mm-hmm. It needs a huge number of colors. This is my one warning to anyone looking at this as a pattern that they want to do. You need minimally 8 contrast colors.
Yeah. Yeah. Would it be, because I think through that, because so, I mean, you've got the grey at the top and the bottom, but through that entire colour work section, you've got so that's if you were marling. Would there be a possibility to work 2 ombres with that in the foreground and background? without knowing it? I mean, you wouldn't get the subtlety of the color. It would be much, much crisper on the color work, but
what I would recommend, because what you're actually doing is you're actually moving through two fades in two directions, and you're fading in and then out. So the background fades from top to bottom and then bottom to top again. So at the midpoint, you switch and you actually go back through the same order of fading. So a double ombre could work. And there are, if you go and look at the different projects, a number of the ones that exist were custom color creations for those of us test knitting. We absolutely can help you build your own custom color palette for this. I would say that this is probably one to seek some professional advice on.
Yeah, definitely.
If you happen to have a really large stash of single balls of Bohemia Sport, because you were really, really wise over the many years of Bohemia Sport existing, and you bought them and stashed them all away, I would love to help you build a perfect double fade for this. The other thing about it, believe it or not, doing it the way I did is the hardest. So this is the most complicated version. This has, I believe, 6 more colors in total in it than all of the other kits that were designed for us. Naturally, I gravitated towards that one. Also because I'm one of the few people who has kind of classic European coloring. I have that icy pale skin and dark hair. So pulling off this array of colors is quite easy for me just because of how my coloring works, which is not necessarily the average human being's color combination. Light eyes, dark hair, pale skin, not necessarily common. But if you go dark as the base, it's actually a lot easier to build that double fade. Because with a dark base, you don't need to make as many color changes throughout the yoke. And that's really where it gets a little more interesting. This version is the only one that features the double fade. Where you fade in and out in the foreground, in the background, and then fade in and out a second time. You can absolutely tone this down for the complexity of building it. And I would recommend I would say if I went back to knit it, again, which I've been thinking about a lot, I don't know that I would do the double stranding again. I think I would be tempted to do it in a single sport weight one.
Yep. So how would you then, because that's my question, because you could either do it in Outlaw or you could do it in Bandit, because what's the gauge on it? What's the standard gauge?
The gauge for this is really interesting because you're using 2 strands of lace weight, which equals sport. So you're knitting it on a 3.75 millimeter needle for the non-colorwork section and a 4 millimeter needle for the colorwork section. But not everyone's gauge changes over colorwork. So make sure to swatch. There is a swatch chart included that's different than everything else. It would be great in Bandit, probably better in Bandit and Southlander, to be honest, as a combination. The Bohemia Sport, I would definitely recommend dropping down a needle size. Because of how the garment is structured, you're not going to see a big change because people may not know this. Your row gauge is less affected by needle size than your stitch gauge. So dropping a needle size means you're not going to lose the depth in the yoke, which is, just to be clear, an incredibly deep yoke. And I knit this when I weighed roughly 10 kgs more than I do now, which is not anything other than I used to competitively weightlift and I'm not doing it any longer. And so you just get smaller. So knitting this, again, I would definitely drop a size or 2 because it is fairly oversized, which isn't bad because it's a very wintry sweater, but worth it.
I know, absolutely. I love Kathy here. Kathy's just saying she's got a 90-litre plastic tub of Bohemia Sport stashed in your garage. Kathy, photograph it now, love. Flick it across.
Yeah, everyone's going to need to see that.
Ethan, and he'll pull. It'll be easy peasy. He can do it. Well, next time you're up in Christchurch, because I know that you're in the south. It is, and you know what? I love projects like that coming into the summertime. And I know people are going to call me crazy on this, but for me, I quite often do either very large, intricate patterns across the summer or bigger projects across the summertime, because that's often the time that I actually, as you said, get a little bit of time to put some quiet music on and actually spend some time diving into something.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's so if you really do think that that's something that you want to do, definitely talk to Ethan about pulling that color work together. Now, is the magazine out yet? It must be soon.
The magazine is out on November 23rd. Hopefully our copies will arrive in time. I have gotten to see every single pattern in it already, long before the rest of you, because I am a cheater. It is, I'm going to be honest, because I've emailed them about this directly before. I find Pom Pom to be wildly inconsistent. Issue to issue, it goes up and down. It's a roller coaster ride. You know, it's a little bit different. With Lina, you always know what you're going to get. And if you love simple classic beauty, buy Lina every time it comes out. It's a no-brainer, right? Pom Pom, they've had some moments. Now, the thing about Pom Pom, the reason they've had some moments is because they take big risks. Yeah. And sometimes with big risks, you have big failures. Hello, eyeball shawl. But it means that when they knock it out of the park, it is incredible. Yeah. And I would say, I would rank this one up there with the issue that Nora Gone edited.
Wow.
Yeah, which is high praise, because, I mean, no offense to everyone else in the knitting industry, there's no one better than Nora Gone. That woman has an eye for pattern and shape and just, yeah. I mean, I've seen her studio. She has 480 swatches that she's never even used.
Yeah, I can imagine. She was, for people that don't know, when Ethan and I were first getting to know each other, we were having snacky things and alcoholic beverages, and we were talking, and I can't remember, I think it was you or what you said, who was your first, because you have your first big designer crush. And for me, my first big designer crush many moons ago was Nora Gone. And
knitting nature.
So I'm a huge fan. So that's fantastic. Oh yes, Kathy, of course. Kathy's up the road from me in Gisborne. Wrong, Kathy. So don't come to me. Well, I could help with colour, Kathy, but you know what? Take it. I think if you've got a 90-litre tub of, and I know the skill you've got, a 90-litre tub of Bohemia, I think you should dive straight into this. I think it would be fantastic. Well, I think that's pretty much me for today. Has anybody, before we disappear, has anybody else got any questions for Ethan? I'll just skim back just in case I've missed any. We've actually got a real mixture here today. We've got Mary here from Ohio. And we've got, we've also got Raylene, who's up late in the UK. I hope everything's okay over there, Raylene. Barbara's just saying, love what you're knitting in the colours, Marie. Thank you for that. And the scarf. Someone was asking about my scarf, so I'm just going to pull this off. This is an oldie but a goodie from the Vintage Busky collection, and it's perfect for my new linen dress. Favorite hitchhiker. I know, I'm really dull. I'm really dull, but this is Crazy Zauber Ball, and if anybody's got any Crazy Zauber Ball, Hitchhiker is a great pattern for Crazy Zauber Ball because it just, uses those colors. One of the things I can say is we've actually got a new yarn coming, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, it'll be here. We'll have it launched before the end of the year. We haven't made it. It's a technique that we're not actually able to do at our mill. So we have actually got it contract made specifically for us elsewhere. And it will look in these colors. So what Crazy Zauber Ball does is they do a long print of colors and then they apply those colors together. Yeah. So which means for color projects like this, simple, fun, it just looks fantastic. And color, people are really loving color at the moment. So really, really excited about that.
I love a fractal plied yarn.
Pardon?
I love a fractal plied yarn.
Yeah, I know. And so we've got some really interesting stuff coming. So I'm really excited about this. We've been sort of had this in the works for such a long time. And the most frustrating thing for us at the moment is, of course, knitting with COVID. So many people have picked the needles and hooks up again, which is fantastic.
So happy to have everyone.
Yeah, it is. And it is a really wonderful thing to see. And I think it just enables us to be able to create some space for ourselves, both mentally and physically, to actually create something and have that time to be actually just sort of breathe. I have to say, I mean, yesterday, so Ethan knows this, and a number of people do. I love, I'm very interested in governmental politics.
I'm not interested in that at all.
No, you're not. Lila, pants on fire. So I was up until 1 o'clock this morning watching the US election unfold. In fact, I've been vastly more engaged in the American election than I was with our own. And
I was like wildly engaged in our election.
Well, see, it's the funny old thing with our election is that I have to admit,
fun.
Yeah, and I have to admit for me, I just love the whole process. And, and often an outcome is irrelevant. It's about participation in the process. And so and of course, last night, what's going on at the moment in the US, I'm finding utterly, utterly riveting. Really glad that I'm not there, but finding it completely, completely riveting.
I was last time.
Yeah, I have actually, I was there during the 1990. And I think we're heading this time round where that one headed that time round. And all I'll have to say for people that are old enough to remember that, hanging chads is all I'll say with that. It was, and I think this one will end up in the same direction. But I see last night, thank goodness, I was so just straight at the stocking stitch section of this, because I was just literally.
Yeah, I was in New Hampshire in 2016. So,
yeah, it is, there is just so much going on. It was really fascinating. Well, as always, it has been an utter delight to have you on. Yes, you and I will be back here again next month, as we always are. So,
people are about to swing in. Shop
is
open.
I need to let you go because you need to sort of opened 4 minutes ago. So thank you very much, Ethan. And I will talk to everybody again on Monday. Don't disappear. And hopefully I will have a newsletter out to you with some good news with what's coming in stock. So until then, have a great weekend, everybody. Take care. Thanks,
soon.
And I'll talk to you all again next week. Bye.
Bye.